Welcome back. It's Bottom Line Africa. Now, on Monday, 2.4 billion people from the 54 Commonwealth member states celebrated Commonwealth Day. This year's theme was delivering a common future, connecting, innovating, transforming. In the Queen's message, the spirit of unity was emphasized. Now, I had a chance to talk to the Commonwealth Secretary General, Baroness Patricia Scotland, on the future of the Commonwealth. And this is what she had to say. Right, so the Commonwealth Day coincides with International Women's Day. Talk to us about this.
I think it was really a seminal moment for us because the Commonwealth, as you know, is made up of 54 countries. That's about 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. And if you think that 50% of them are women, and so to have the Commonwealth Day celebrated on the same day as International Women's Day was very special because the Commonwealth heads of government leaders have made women's empowerment and women's equality a central plank of the aspirations that they want to deliver on for so many years. And they emphasized it last when they came together in London for the last Commonwealth heads of government meeting that took place in 2018. But during the period of COVID that we're now going through, the whole issue of the impact that that has had on women, I think has really been highlighted. So to have Commonwealth Day and International Women's Day on the same day, I think was extraordinarily prescient and evocative, not least, of course, because I'm the first woman to have been the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth. And so with Margaret Kobia, who is Professor Margaret Kobia, of course, your Cabinet Secretary, who is responsible for gender, she is also the Cabinet Secretary who is responsible as for chair of the Commonwealth Women Affairs meeting. And she has been working with us and leading some of the work to say that the gains that we've made in the last 100 years for women shouldn't be lost. And the fear that many women across the world, and certainly many women in our Commonwealth had, is that because of what's happening in COVID, many of the gains of women's empowerment and the advances that we have made would have been lost because the impact on women has been really quite pernicious and severe, and the impact also on our girls because many schools have been closed, and what we've noticed is that girls tend to be absorbed back into their families and they do take on a greater proportion of the homework that has to be done at home as opposed to the homework which has to be done for school. And that more girls were going back more slowly than boys, and not as many girls seem to have taken advantage of the digital world. So bringing Commonwealth Day with its powerful commitment to equality and good governance and the rule of law and equality for women, together with International Women's Day, I think was rather special.
Through the COVID-19 pandemic, the world realized that we have a shared vulnerability. Talk to us about how exactly should we be prepared for disasters?
Well, I think the tragedy is that this pandemic may not be the last pandemic. The climatic changes which has happened in our world mean that illnesses that used to stay in one region or one area now travels. And if we've learned anything from the coronavirus, is that none of us are safe. It has put its tentacles into each and every home, each and every country, and it, a bit like domestic violence, is no respecter of people. Corona doesn't care whether you're a prime minister or a president or a road sweeper or a dustman or a doctor or a nurse or a housewife. It is no respecter of peoples, and it's no respecter of countries. So it's not as if one of us could say, well, my country is so far away, so divorced from the rest of the world, I am untouched by this. None of us have been untouched. That is why it's a pandemic. So we have learned some terrible lessons during this last year, lessons I would have hoped we wouldn't have to learn. We've learnt lessons about our interdependence, our interconnectivity. We've learnt lessons that we are one humanity, and that unless I keep you safe, and those you love safe, those I love will not be safe. And that interdependence, I think, came at a time when a number in our world thought that they could live isolated, totally independent lives, divorced from anything or anyone else. So I think Corona has given the world a shock, and it's a wake-up call. And we've had two wake-up calls. One is this, the understanding that health is wealth, the understanding that if you don't have life, you have nothing. You know, you can't talk about economy until you talk about life. Many of our member states have chosen life over economy, but there have been huge economic consequences for that. But none of us can say it was the wrong choice. But now we have issues in relation to debt and debt management, because all of us have had to make unpalatable choices. And the fact that the economic consequences of those correct choices are now being felt by all of us. So the international financial institutions are having to look at, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to respond to the huge increase that we're going to have in debt? But if you look at the pandemic, we have to come up with innovative solutions, because this is new. We haven't got an off-the-shelf answer, and we've had to develop one. So it has stretched the ingenuity of our innovative medical creators, because we've got to have a new vaccine. So you've had the brightest and the best of the world coming together, and we've had to do something which is not competition, it's collaboration. How do we collaborate to get the vaccines we need to the frontline people who need them quickly, to make sure the millions of people who've now been killed, that doesn't continue? And Africa has done amazingly well, because if you look at the way in which Africa has contained the virus and the innovation that has come from Africa, it has been breathtaking. But it's been important because each region has had something to give. Each region has had something to learn from and to share. And we have done something, I think, incredibly important in the Secretariat in creating the Coronavirus Resource Centre and pooling our health ministers together, because we've been able to exchange not only ideas, but knowledge and expertise, and not just about the things that work. More importantly, I believe, we have been able to exchange things that have not worked, because our countries and all of our individuals, we're striving to find the solutions. We will never do everything right, because you're experimenting, you're hoping, and the things that people are trying are similar, because you are being sensible. But not all the things you try will work. So every time we've been able to share what has not worked, it enables us to do better what will work. So we're sharing both, to save time, to save money, and to save opportunity.
You know, when you talk about gender-based violence, most of these cases were witnessed because there was loss of jobs and people were stressed. Even as the world in general recovers from, the COVID-19 pandemic, as economies, as countries like Kenya, how exactly do we speed up this process, considering we're dealing with debt and corruption?
We have to understand that this is a global issue. So just as we can't combat corona on our own, we're not going to be able to deal with this debt as individual countries. We have to, at a global level, come to a decision as to how are we going to respond to this globally, because these exogenous shocks have come out of nowhere. Nobody was ready for this. It wasn't as if everyone sat around saying, oh, well, the pandemic's going to come tomorrow, let me make arrangements. No, so what we are looking at in the Commonwealth, for example, is we're looking at creating a universal vulnerability index, because we have to understand that GDP isn't the only criterion through which you can evaluate vulnerability. In the past, we just looked at fiscal probity. You know, so you've got to be fiscally resilient, you've got to be fiscally prudent, and if you're fiscally prudent, you have your GDP is high. If you're fiscally imprudent, it isn't. It's not as simple as that anymore. When you're faced with climate change, so for example, you have a country such as mine, Dominica, which has a medium-income country. In 2017, Hurricane Maria hit Dominica, devastated it, and Dominica lost 226% of her GDP. So she went from being a middle-income country to a no-income country. Now, that was not within your gift. It is something that's happened to you. So we now know that we have to deal with climate change. We have to deal with coronavirus or pandemics or additional shocks. How are we going to respond to that as a global community? And a number of people are saying this now is a period of fiscal forbearance. So we've got to come up with a new solution at the international level as to how we support people and build back better. But there are opportunities. So, for example, the Commonwealth have created the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which will enable countries who are small and developing countries to get money from the funds, such as the Green Fund, to build back better, to mitigate climate change, but also to adapt to climate change. With just 1.5 million pounds or dollars, we have already delivered for our small states about 36 million. But we have $650 million worth of projects in the pipeline. Many of these projects will deal with innovative, new solutions. So if you look at the problem we have on unemployment for our young people, we need to create the new jobs for tomorrow, as opposed to the old jobs of yesterday. If you look at the jobs that we are doing now in the last 5 years, many of those jobs did not exist 5 years ago. Think about all the social media jobs. I mean, they just didn't exist. The fact that we have gone to a digital platform, we now know that digital inclusion will be pivotal to building back better, because we've moved from a face-to-face mainly to a digital platform. So what does that mean for our developing countries? Because now, if you aren't part of the digital world, we now will have the digital divide. So the work that we're doing on SMEs, the networks that we're creating, the opportunities to create, I want us to look at how we create an SME app to assist small and medium-sized businesses to trade more easily within the Commonwealth SME network.
It's gender inclusive.
Most of the SMEs in our world are run by women and young people. So whenever we talk about SMEs, you are automatically talking about young and female innovators who are going into these startups. Disproportionately, it's women and young people of both genders. So if we're looking at growth and we're looking at building back better, that's where we're going to have to build back better.
What role can the Commonwealth play when it comes to advancing good governance and democracy, especially in its states in Africa, developing countries in Africa?
Well, we have spent a huge part of the Commonwealth's life working on governance, peace, and how we can create better methods, not just to talk about governance, but to implement it. So certainly since I became Secretary General, we've been looking at not just seeing how we can promote policy development, but how do we promote policy implementation. Because the trick is always from how you go from rhetoric to action. So all our work now is on implementation. So we have looked, and we've just had last month a series of Commonwealth performance management workshops, because what we know is the difference between governments is really the governments all wish to do good things. But it's not just the wishing, it's the doing. So how do you enable governments who want to do the right thing to actually do the right thing? When I was speaking to a number of our member states, they've said, look, but I'm small, I don't have the money, I don't have the absorptive capacity within my country, I don't have all the expertise that I need. Data is incredibly difficult for me to get. And so I want to make informed policy decisions, Secretary General, but how, when I am poor, do I get access to the sorts of knowledge and expertise which will enable me to make those decisions? And I understood they were absolutely right. So, but we know that we may not have individually all that information, but we definitely have it collectively. So the question was, how could we collect the received wisdom of 1/3 of the world and share it in a way that all could benefit and we wouldn't leave anyone behind? So in the last 4 years, we have probably created about 42 implementation toolkits. So there's implementation toolkit in terms of fiscal management. How do you do risk management? How do you make sure that governments actually deliver what they say on the tin? Because they want to, but they don't always know how to. So I think, and it's been so well received, we are just 3 quarters through delivering the performance management implementation toolkit to all our regions. We did the Africa European region first in January. In February, we then did Asia, and we have just completed last Friday the Caribbean region. And the Caribbean was represented by PERM secretaries and cabinet secretaries, as were other regions. And all of those who've attended the performance management implementation workshop have said that this is fantastic. And there's a commitment from many of our countries that they wish to implement it. The performance management toolkit enables government to say, this is what we want to do. This is what we are now doing. This is how much it is costing us, and we will now, in an open way, be able to tell our people whether we are actually delivering what we say on the tin. And it's really important that we have a fair platform, because if the assessment of government performance isn't objective, if it is only subjective, then it could be good, bad or ugly. And it depends on the beholder. You know, I can say, you need to do this for 100%. But if you don't know before I've told you, and you say, well, I've done something else, I can come along and say, you're terrible. But in fact, if I say to you, you have to deliver the following, and you do deliver the following, all 100%, then you can say, I'm excellent, and I can say, amen.
Yes.
So this transparency, these practical things, we managed to create a financial risk implementation toolkit, where a number of our countries have used. So one of our countries used the toolkit to enable them to make an assessment as to how they can respond to COVID. And so within their own resources, using our toolkit, they were able to by which I mean take money from one place to put it another. So internally, they were able to target $25 million from their own resources to address the issues of corona. Otherwise, they would have had to go to the IFIs. But using the tools, and I was so proud of this, using the tools we had created and helped them to train, they did this for themselves. They were empowered to make their own choices with their own people, and we had trained people internally, so they didn't need someone to come and do it for them. They could do it for themselves. So that's what the Commonwealth is doing. We're trying to put the tools into the hands of our member states so they can actually deliver on that good governance in a way that's transparent and fair, and people can feel it, taste it, and see it.
All right, so the Queen's message during the Commonwealth speech, the Commonwealth Day speech, talked about unity, and it really emphasized on unity. As Commonwealth, how exactly can we use this in harnessing potential in its member states?
I think we can continue to do what we're doing even more aggressively now. That's coming together, sharing our knowledge, sharing our expertise, giving freely to each other. Because the thing that I've been so impressed by, so touched by, so humbled by, is that any time I have asked any member state, A, will you help me? B, will you help another member state? C, will you give that which you have delivered to your members free to all our members? No one has said no. They've all said, yes, of course I will do that. Of course I'll do that, SG. So I would say, I hope that all our ministerial teams, we have ministers meeting on health, ministers meeting on education, ministers meeting on women, ministers meeting on foreign affairs, women's ministers meeting on finance, ministers meeting on youth, women's meeting on sport. All these ministers have similar portfolios. They all have commitment to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. We're all trying to achieve the same quality of care for our members in our communities. So I think success is continuing to do that, sharing, coming together, and basically loving each other. Because what I have seen is the best of humanity in the last year. We've also seen some of the worst, but we've seen more of the good. And what I've seen happen in the Commonwealth, which has been amazing, is that countries have cared about each other. Look at what India has done. India, who has so many of her own burdens, she's 1.36 billion people. She has reached out, giving vaccines to some of the smallest and the most disadvantaged in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Asia region. And she has done that because they are her Commonwealth brothers and sisters. And when they meet around that table, our Commonwealth leaders meet as a family. And I will never forget in 2018 seeing your president, Uhuru Kenyatta, who is not a small man, with his arms out like this, and Indra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, coming towards him and receiving a bear hug. That's family. That's family. And that's also love. And in this dark and terrible time, we need that friendship, we need that love, we need that family to shine. And one of the bright lights of this terrible dark period is the Commonwealth has shone. But we need to be even brighter.